Ho, 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 and Merry Christmas! Season's greetings from Digital Foundry. We're here to bring you some Christmas cheer and a very special present, an unexpected, low-profile game that might have a fair bit to tell us about the viability of Unreal Engine 5 and ray tracing on Nintendo Switch 2. But I, of course, have a certain ray tracing aficionado in this video yet again, one Alex Battaglia. Alex?
Yes, that was an amazing ho ho ho. I'm astounded by the quality of the ho ho ho. Yeah, we're here to talk about a game called Layers of Fear, a game that we've covered, I think, multiple times at DF right now, including a developer live stream, which you should go and check out. It's in the vault. But today, specifically about the Switch 2 version, which just launched not too long ago.
Yeah. So I think it's really important to establish here just off the top why we're interested in Layers of Fear, because Layers of Fear, it's not exactly the highest profile game out there. With all due respect to Layers of Fear, it's quite a good game. This game is basically a remake compilation of some prior Bloober team games, some older Layers of Fear titles that were released on 8th gen consoles. And this game was released in 2023 for current gen consoles and PC. And it uses Unreal Engine 5. But the key thing with this game is that it was like one of the first titles, if not the very first title, to use Lumen, I think outside of Fortnite, outside of basically the first party Epic game. It actually uses Lumen. It doesn't use VSM, it doesn't use Nanite, but it does use Lumen. And as of last week, they dropped it on Switch 2. So that really piqued my interest because we've not really seen any games on Switch 2 that use any of those headlining UE5 features, including Lumen, including Nanite, including VSM. And also, we've only documented one title that actually uses real-time ray tracing on Switch 2, which is Star Wars Outlaws. So this would be the second ever game that we've documented that uses real-time ray tracing on Switch 2. So the prospect of seeing a game with Lumen on Switch 2 was very exciting. And I said to Rich, let's just check this out and see if there's a story there, because I couldn't really tell. They hadn't published much media from the game. Couldn't really tell what they were doing. But obviously, if it uses Lumen on other platforms, and if they rely on Lumen so heavily for the game's lighting, could be here. And so I boot up the game, and I'm seeing all the characteristic signs of Lumen that I would expect to see. I'm seeing splotchy noise patterns in certain areas. I'm seeing relatively high quality GI with some real-time characteristics. I'm seeing a flashlight that casts light into the surrounding environment that bounces light around. It has all the hallmarks of Lumen that I'm used to seeing. In particular, maybe software Lumen, it has more of that appearance to me in general. But it's also not at the quality level that I generally expect from Lumen. So obviously I have Alex on hand to explain this in more detail before I talk about it a little bit. I guess my first question is this Lumen, and what kind of findings can you make about the quality in this game, especially relative to the other console versions? Because we have, a Series S version that's quite good, quite performant, and has Lumen GI, Lumen reflections as well here. That is kind of our comparator for this game.
Yeah, so basically, I would say right off the bat, based upon all the telltale, almost negative qualities that you described there, which is kind of funny. Yeah, it does give off like lower quality Lumen settings appearance. So I would just say 100% confirmed from the subjective visual output. When you put it side by side with Series S, you start to see that it is maintaining in a number of scenes a similar presentation. If it were different, you would expect that, like for example, like in Chronos, the New Dawn, in that game, when you put it side by side with Series S, as you did back then, or any other platform for that matter that had Lumen on, you would notice that there were just areas that would be just like almost completely darkish, with no semblance of any sort of bounced colored lighting scattering across the environment. And here it maintains in most scenes a similar presentation. Yes, you will notice though, I would say that things like indirect shadows from the lighting are, I would say, less fine. You will notice also in side-by-sides, regardless of resolution, that the lighting is a good deal noisier than you would see on the Series S version. But I think the biggest difference between the versions in any given scene, when there's anything that is like metallic, or when there's like glass and other things that essentially reflect light more coherently, you'll notice that the Switch 2 version appears to be missing Lumen's reflection component. Lumen does two things. It does ray traced reflections and ray traced diffuse global illumination. And you can, and actually a number of Series S games turn this off to save performance, and they instead, essentially what they do is they take the diffuse GI's contribution and it's simplified into a spherical harmonic, and it is used to give the appearance of specularity. And it works pretty well for rougher surfaces, but as soon as it is something more coherent, then you start noticing big differences there. And there's a couple of comparisons you had, for example, like a lamp in a room being lit up in the corner, and you should be able to see its actually reflection, I believe, on the wood ground below it. And you kind of are missing that. You also see that in a couple of other scenes too. So it's parts of Lumen, but not the whole thing. And it appears to be missing the reflection component, as well as a lot of that core resolution and quality. And there may be actually other cutbacks too, because there are some surprising areas in here where, for example, at some of the footage you sent me in darker rooms, some rooms look very similar to one another in this game, but other ones, they almost look like they're lacking ambient lighting altogether, which is, I don't know why that would happen. I was kind of postulating that one of the things that they might be reducing would be further reducing the SDF quality. So Series S might be using the local SDF. So the way, I believe this is software Lumen. We'll talk about that a bit more in a second, but you can kind of have it so that it doesn't trace against a very higher quality version of the game's geometry represented as sign distance fields, rather a lower one that's more general, and it kind of amortizes everything into like one giant blobby thing. And if the room was actually very concave and didn't have a lot of features, maybe there's just like a hole in the wall there in the Lumen view, and it's lighting it just completely incorrectly. That could be one of the things they did. There's reasons why you do that. Tracing performance is going to be lower, as well as you're going to have a smaller memory footprint, which is something we've seen developers talk about on Switch 2 before. So I would say 100% Lumen is in there with some obvious compromises, and it does appear to be using the software version, which is interesting.
Yeah, like you mentioned, Alex, the game has like some very obvious Lumen compromises that are like super obvious. But I think the key thing here is like this game is designed and arted around Lumen RT. It needs Lumen GI basically to work at all. They've built this game around it, so like it doesn't really work without it. But I think it's kind of interesting because there is this kind of like what you see is what you get kind of philosophy with games these days, where the expectation is that you're going to be able to author lighting in the editor, see it instantly, and also have that change basically applied to all the platforms that you're shipping on in some capacity. You know, there might be some fidelity differences here and there, but overall, you know, your GI presentation, for instance, it's going to be like roughly similar across the platforms, and it's going to be arted up with that in mind. So artists only need to work once on a game. And indeed, when you look at this game across different platforms, like I was looking at it on PC earlier today, looking at it on even a console as lowly as the Series S, right, which presumably has lower settings across the board, it looks very similar. Yeah. Now, there are areas where it differs, like you look in a mirror, and in Software Lumen, you don't really see a crystal sharp, clear reflection. If you turn on Hardware Lumen, you do, presumably because they don't want to just like show you a mirror with no character in it or something. That's not very good looking, right? I would expect. And also, obviously, the quality of the reflection would be pretty low in general because of the SDFs. But yeah, that is generally a compromise that we are seeing here, which is that like the overall quality of the Lumen presentation is significantly degraded. And there are some areas where it's like not so bad, like you mentioned, like, you know, maybe the GI doesn't spread as convincingly. Some of the directionality is lost. There's some characteristic splotchiness here and there if you move the camera and try to abuse it. There's some obvious light leak in areas. Small objects no longer block light as often, and they don't leave super nice subtle shadows behind it in as many instances, right? They don't look quite as good. There are a lot of tweaks, like if we do back and forths between Switch 2 and Series S, I'm sure you can see that. But obviously, you know, they've also disabled Lumen reflections, like you said. They also don't seem to have SSR as well. So like you look around, there's no apparent SSR in this game, which is interesting because that's like, usually that's the fallback, right? On Series S, they go to the SSR. Here, that's not the case. like you mentioned, the kind of key area where I was personally confused, I don't really know what's going on here or why it's going on, is those areas where there's like minimal or no GI coverage, and the game just has this super glowy look, and the GI just starts disappearing entirely. Like in this ship area, if I walk forward, the GI just like disappears. And interestingly, on
Yeah.
Series S, that's an area where the game has some light leak issues, right? Because that's a boundary between an interior and an exterior. And obviously, that's a problem with Lumen, and the wall looks quite thin as well. So that's not ideal. But on Switch 2, they just turn it off when you get close to that boundary. I don't know exactly what's going on there, but everything looks very weird. It kind of reminds me, I don't want to rag on it too much because I've ragged on this game in different ways. But Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, like
Oh
how
yeah.
glowy and odd and kind of speculary and weird that game looks, where everything just looks poorly situated, especially in like more open world areas. But I think I wanted to add just a little bit of context into this game because we did get some information that broke a little bit late in this video's production process, which is the developers actually offered some comment on the game. I think the CEO of Bloober offered some comment on this game. And he said that the Switch 2 version indeed does have Lumen, right? That's interesting. So there is confirmation as to if the game uses Lumen or not, but obviously we want to look with our eyes before we trust a statement from a CEO necessarily. And Bloober has also stated in some kind of statement to WCCF Tech that the game doesn't have ray tracing support on Switch 2. Now, it's not a direct quote. I'm not sure exactly what context they're taking, but WCCF Tech is reporting that the Switch 2 version does not actually feature ray tracing support. So I think what is going on here and how I would square this circle is that I think the game doesn't have hardware RT support on Switch 2, but it does have software Lumen support. And indeed, if you go to the PC version, the hardware RT setting is labeled just ray tracing. So I think that's what's going on here, is they're basically in their nomenclature, triangle ray tracing, hardware Lumen, that's just ray tracing. Software Lumen does not count as ray tracing in their nomenclature. But yeah, I wanted to know if you had any kind of reaction to that. And another thing I was kind of curious about, Alex, is there is this very cheap version of Lumen called the Irradiance Cache Lumen, if I'm not mistaken, for mobile devices. I think that's just in very recent versions of Unreal, or at least the coverage that I saw indicated that it's only really in some kind of like experimental, reasonably performant shape, and as of like October or something. I don't even know if you would, I don't know if it's stable enough to ship a game with. I think it's still very early, but I think based on the artifact patterns that we're seeing here, and obviously based on the Unreal version number, which by the way, according to the game's IP notices, very helpful on Switch 2, it's 5.5.3. I think it's probably not using that like super cheap, very probe-oriented Lumen.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And it's interesting. If they were to do that based on 553, there's a couple of interesting things here. One, they did upgrade engine versions to get this game out on Switch 2, which is interesting. The original 2023 release is obviously not something from 2 years later.
I think it was on 5.1 originally.
Yeah, it was early. And so they had to do that, but they would then have to integrate from a more advanced version, downporting it backwards to their version, and that would be probably a headache in its own right. It may be missing features that they would have to do themselves. Probably not worth it for a low profile release like this is going to be, or maybe it won't be now that we've made this video. Who really knows? But yeah, it doesn't appear to be doing that. Some telltale signs of that would be probably zero specular coverage, which is interesting. I don't think the irradiance field version of Lumen is going to have any normal specular coverage beyond placing cube maps if you wanted, and using SSR. So that would be one thing that would be a telltale sign. You'd also have different stability of lighting property. I actually think it might be more visually stable than lower quality versions of standard Lumen using screen traces, because that's one thing that probes tend to do well, is they offer a greater stability of image at the cost of lighting accuracy. So I think that would be another thing. And if you wanted to get a sense of what maybe aspects of that could look like, you can play Doom the Dark Ages or Indiana Jones, and with the path tracing turned off, that is, and you'd get a sense of what lighting could look like there a little bit. Okay, so I don't think that's it. One thing that is interesting though is, like you said, Bloober for some reason in their games labels ray tracing as hardware RT. Just to say it really quickly, Lumen, regardless of whatever mode it is not special. It is ray tracing. It is ray tracing. It's just tracing against different things. The geometry, as in hardware, triangles, hardware ray tracing, and or software where it's not using any hardware stuff and just traces against really blobby SDFs, as we talked about so many times in the past. So that's the thing. It is interesting that they aren't using hardware RT though, because that is supported on Switch. And I wonder if there's a conversion point at all. If you were to turn down the quality settings enough for hardware RT that it becomes more performant than software RT. I'm not sure if that's the case. So maybe that's why they're not doing it here, just because invariably hardware RT is going to be more costly because its detail is a lot higher no matter what you do. So that's the thing to take into mind. So we'll see what that means for the future. We'll talk about that later. The thing is, okay, so after having said all that about RT and hardware RT, I'm curious. I've been watching this footage right now, Oliver. What is the resolution like? What is the gameplay experience like? How is the performance, which even just looks a little rocky when watching it right now? Give me all the details about Layers of Fear.
Yeah, Alex, I do think we should probably discuss the game itself now, because we've just been fixated on the game's Lumen presentation, which is perhaps doing a disservice to the game here, which is actually quite a good kind of adventure horror game. Very interesting, I'm sure. Very interesting from a technical perspective, but also not a bad game. On top of the Lumen tweaks, if we're just looking at visuals, there are some cutbacks here, as you might expect, relative to Series S. Shadows are lower resolution. Volumetric lighting, also lower resolution. Who would have thought? Transparencies have been tweaked or removed. Like, the game is missing a lot of glass, apparently, it looks like, in light fixtures and things like that. That's all been pruned back here. Textures have been simplified. There are a lot of cuts, but nothing... Like, the Lumen cuts are most interesting and I think most significant here, and there are some cuts elsewhere that you'd expect to see in almost any game on Switch 2 that's being translated from current generation consoles. In terms of resolution, I think docked mode is 1080p or close to it. For internal res, I got some counts at like 648p, but a lot of counts at like 540p, so it does seem to use DRS there. I'm not sure what the upscaler is. It's definitely not full-fat DLSS. But Alex and I were debating before this call if it's has some TSR characteristics. I was saying has some tiny DLSS characteristics potentially. So it could be either one, possibly TSR, maybe TSR there, maybe tiny DLSS, something like that. But it has those characteristics. And I think image quality is pretty good for a game of this caliber. It's fine enough as far as these things go. But the big surprise with this game that really kind of shocked me initially, but actually when you think about it a little bit more, it makes more sense, is that this game is targeting 60 FPS. So this is ray tracing on a Switch 2 at 60 FPS. Pretty remarkable. And it actually mostly hits 60 FPS. There are some problems with it for sure, I would say. Like, there are some areas where camera travel is inconsistent from frame to frame. That's an issue that we noted in some Unreal Engine 5 titles, unfortunately, some Unreal Engine 4 titles as well. So even though the game is running at 60 FPS, the game will have, like, one frame will travel this much, next frame will travel this much, and it feels like the game is stuttering, even though, as you can see here, the frame timeline is perfectly flat. And there are some genuine performance drops, including one very weird instance in one area where the game's performance was totally collapsing, Alex, that looked awful, I think.
Yeah, that there is, it's so the readout may be between 30 and 40, but due to frame times dropping into the 50 and 66 millisecond range during that time, the average doesn't actually give you a sense of what the feel is, and it actually looks much more like 20 or even lower to my eye. Just because, think about it, 66 millisecond frame time is a huge fraction of a second. That's less than positive. A little bit confusing, but yeah, that's the way it is.
Yeah, and then finally here, rounding things out in handheld mode, it actually looks very similar to docked mode in my side-by-sides. So maybe it's still doing a similar output resolution there. Internally, it's 540p, roughly speaking, so similar to docked mode, but it has a degraded performance level. It runs at about 40 FPS, 50 FPS here in some instances. It's clearly dropping frames, and also VRR doesn't seem to be working correctly here because it's always stuttery. It always feels off. That's not ideal. So overall, I think the game itself is less interesting than the tech accomplishment it represents. But the game itself is like not bad. It's a fun, breezy little kind of adventure game. It is a horror game, but you mostly just poke around and look for things and try to pick things up. And there aren't that many puzzles or anything crazy like that. It's kind of just like an old school adventure type game, which is pretty cool.
Right.
But I guess, Alex, what's your overall takeaway here with this game? Because, like, obviously we've established many times over the course of this video, this is Lumen. It is running on Switch 2. Good image quality, or acceptable image quality at least. 60 FPS. Wow, that's a headline. That's a headline in and of itself, right? That's really exciting.
Yeah.
But on top of that, it is a very simple game. So exactly, what do we take away here from this game? What does it tell us, if anything, I guess?
I would say it doesn't actually give us a great indication of how UE5 games will be running on Switch 2 in the future. This is a retooling of a game from 2016 designed around previous generation consoles. It is also very low. I mean, the interactivity is there and the fact that you touch things in the game and they move a little bit, but there's not like heaps of AI walking around. There is not like moving foliage. There is an entire city to deal with, etc. It's just a lot of smaller rooms. And those things are invariably easier to trace against usually actually than more complex things with like larger view distances. And once again, this is also using an older engine version and using standard software Lumen with cuts like we described. But I would do imagine the reason why Epic develops that other lower form of Lumen, which would be representative of like medium or low settings on a PC version of the game, is because they probably had a lot of developer demands to make a version of Lumen that allowed them to have a game that ran across a variety of platforms and had a similar diffuse lighting presentation. And I think that's why it was developed. It's probably going to have much better image quality and performance than what we see here, which is more a hacked up version of the same equivalent idea. And I think that would be the better way to do it from a developer's perspective. So I don't think this is actually a good indicator of what we should expect for other UE5 titles. And at the end of the day, yes, 60 FPS, but you did mention a number of minus points there regarding camera traversal and also some strange performance here or there, which and also image quality. It's probably one of these games that looks a good deal better on the handheld than it does maybe on a big 4K screen. With given the resolution metrics you mentioned. So, I wonder if that is also a telltale sign of the future. Maybe the output resolution is a good indicator of what we should expect for UE5, but I think the rest is all very specific to this title.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. I mean, I think there are some positive signs you can take away from it, namely that Lumen in some form can fit in a 16.7 millisecond frame on Switch 2. Limited game, but that's cool. 60 FPS, again, decent image quality, that's positive. But there are some reasons why it's not necessarily so positive, and I would start there with the performance question, because, I mean, it is 60 FPS on Series S. And I indeed even tested the game on Steam Deck, and I was able to get it running at circa 50 FPS with all settings on low and a bit of upscaling. Well, it doesn't sound very good, but I would say the game on low looks a lot better than Switch 2, with higher quality Lumen GI and Lumen reflections, by the way. That's pretty remarkable. It's not as crisp as Switch 2, but I think those are compromises I would much rather make and actually get the full feature set there. And obviously the game is like, it's all small rooms, it's all small corridors pretty much. Best case for Lumen, don't have super complicated SDFs that need like super long range tracing or anything like that. It doesn't use VSM, doesn't use nanite, doesn't use Lumen reflections. It's ultimately a very light UE5 game. It's not, I don't think it's going to tell us much about like the provenance of an Expedition 33 on Switch 2, which people talk about a lot, right? Or like a Gears of War E-Day on Switch 2. God knows, only knows.
Oh my goodness.
Those are things that you couldn't really reasonably extrapolate from this, right, at all. You might be able to extrapolate and say, hey, if you also have a really light UE5 game, maybe you can get it running on this. But I think for those games, you're going to need a greater amount of accommodation. I think Epic needs to figure out a way to make UE5 work really well on Switch 2. My sense at the moment from different areas here is that UE5 projects on Switch 2 aren't going so well necessarily, especially if you have these really heavy systems that you need to scale over to Switch 2. We're seeing games that either aren't shipping with key UE5 systems on Switch 2, or are getting announced for Switch 2 and then getting indefinitely delayed, like Borderlands 4, or are not getting worked on, period, because developers are presumably looking at this challenge and saying, hey, this isn't ready for us. The tech is not ready for us. Epic needs to do something. Epic needs to ship a new version of Lumen. Epic needs to fix this problem with Nanite. Epic needs to create, lower quality shadow settings, whatever it is, make our game performant. Epic needs to ease up demands in the CPU in this simulation, whatever. So I don't think the tech is necessarily ready for that. I think we're seeing that across the board. And actually, the weird thing is, though, even though this game ships with Lumen on Switch 2, it doesn't really inspire an enormous amount of confidence because of how far they've cut it back, because of how simple the game is. Like, it is, in aggregate, probably a positive data point that it is running on Switch 2 in a form that looks okay, but it's also not necessarily something where you're looking at this and you're saying, wow, the Switch 2 is punching above its weight. It's kind of like, well, it's there, it's good, but it's not shipping in a really advanced title. Not too much you can say about it, and it is shipping in significantly integrated form even in this title. So yeah, I think Alex is probably going to do it for this multi-game. I think we've covered this pretty thoroughly between you and I. So perhaps we should call this one a day. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, everyone in the audience, for watching.
As always, and Merry Christmas. I think this video will be published on Christmas. I'm not sure. If it isn't, well, Alex and I will look a little bit stupid here, but
it's all right. I wear this all week.
Yeah. Perhaps this will be published on Christmas Day. And of course, happy holidays and Merry Christmas. And please enjoy yourself over the holiday and have a good time there. But I think if you did enjoy this video, please like, subscribe, and press the bell for YouTube notifications. Check out the Patreon at patreon.com/digitalfoundry for exclusive and early access content. And to get in touch, use social media. And this is Alex Nulliver bidding you for Weihnachten.